Jujutsu Kaisen Season 3 Episode 4 is out, and my goodness, there's a lot to talk about here, as I didn't expect this to be one of the most divisive episodes of Jujutsu Kaisen ever. So we're going to get into this. If you're new here, my whole content is talking about animation and the people behind the scenes and the quality that the episode presents and how it actually relates to the story as well. I talk about the goods, the bads, and the things I have criticisms on, etc. As I am somebody who's going to school for animation and storyboarding, and if you like this kind of content, leave a like and subscribe and ring that notification button to get caught up whenever I post. So let's get into it because there's a lot to talk about. Starting off, this episode was going to be really big and really anticipated by a lot of people. This episode of Jujutsu Kaisen was something that the series director himself had talked about consistently that he wanted to adapt, which makes sense. Maki is a fan favorite character, and the content from the Zenin Clan massacre is some of the most loved content in the entirety of the JJK manga. Fans had anticipated this moment specifically for years. What adds to this anticipation was actually the behind the scenes surrounding this. Before the season even started, we understood that this episode was going to be a high priority one, and in that regard, the staff doesn't lie. This is one of the most stacked episodes of Jujutsu Kaisen when it comes to top tier names participating, whether it's the legendary names that just participated on the Chainsaw Man Reze film, or a lot of the big action directors and animators that were on JJK season 2 or other anime as a whole. What adds to it is this episode was being led by the series director himself, along with being entirely storyboarded by him. There's been a lot of people who criticized this series director Goso when it comes to his action, and this episode was a chance to actually see what he was truly capable of when it comes to his action, animation, and direction, to see if he was truly on par with some of the best like Itsuki Shishigami, who did the Jogo fight, or other episodes. And like I said, with the staff list like this, you could definitely bet that there was a lot of hype surrounding it. However, the reception is calling this episode overhyped or just bad. A lot of the people calling it overhyped are talking about how it's not on par with the Maharaga episode, which I would like to dispel immediately before we actually talk about the episode. As while I understand why the Maharaga episode is as well known as it is not the peak of Jujutsu Kaisen and shouldn't be judged as a metric on it. It is the most ambitious episode when it comes to sheer raw animation power, and likely no episode of this season or for the rest of the show is going to touch it in that regard. But it is not close to this episode or other episodes of JJK when it comes to the level of polish, visual cohesion, in terms of the art direction and compositing, scene consistency, drawing quality, etc. Which is why the episodes I actually base things off of is actually the Jogo episode directed by Itsuki Shishigami. This episode is basically perfect from start to finish. It does share a ridiculous level of ambition when it comes to its raw animation power, but the difference between this and the Maharaga episode is that this episode is actually polished in the aspects I mentioned, like its comp, its art direction, drawings, etc. Would I say this most recent episode of Jujutsu Kaisen beats it in that regard? No. There are problems I have with this Maki episode, whether it's the melting that happens in certain scenes, some odd moments like this very awkward zoom in, and some of the stuff that happens in the first half of the episode, but I will say this is a top 3 best animated episode of the show anyways, and far exceeds the quality and consistency and polish that the Maharaga episode has. If you're judging it based off of its raw animation in comparison to the Maharaga fight, just stop, because we're just never going to get another episode like that, unless the production schedule completely breaks down. The main reason for that is mainly due to the fact that because the episode had no time, a lot of people just animated whatever at points to even have enough content in the first place to air on time. There are genuinely people who showed up on that episode that likely wouldn't have shown up if the episode had a good schedule. Anyways, let's actually get into the episode for Maki. The stuff in the very first half of the episode, while is impressive and significantly higher than your average anime quality, isn't necessarily that crazy. There is some parts of character acting, but I think what carries a lot of these beginning scenes is these really spacious shots and the art direction that is really good, which is something you typically see from Goso as a director. I will say I do like the voice acting a lot more than anything when Maki's mother is calling out for her. Maki doesn't know what happened behind this door, but it's likely that her mom does. Even if she's saying some awful things to her child here, you can likely interpret that she is calling out to Maki as an attempt to save her life. I will say I do love the vibes when she confronts Ogi here. Once again, more ridiculously good spacious shots and a really good 3D background. Maki's interpretation is she's going into this fight expecting a normal sword fight. That's how it's presented to the viewer as well, like a Ghost of Tsushima fight. Swift attacks happen with nice poses to let us know just long enough what's going on before snapping quickly to the next action. I will say the aesthetic also in this section is nice. It's presented in a more raw vibe. I think there's no shadows in the entirety of these scenes, so everything comes from from just how good the line placement is when it comes to the drawings. Funny enough, these washed out colors with the red very much reminds me of the Maharaga episode. Subtle character acting transitions us into Ike's scene, I don't know how to say his name, with these paintbrush like effects that have a lot of deep symbolism and meaning into them, specifically what appears to be an ultrasound shot right before the ending, transitioning us to a beach scene animated mostly by Tadashi Hiromatsu. Interesting that this is another beach scene on a Mappa show where Tadashi Hiromatsu is animating on, as he did basically this exact same thing on the Chainsaw Man Reze movie. And while the character acting itself is good, I'm definitely more impressed with the art direction or the background drawings. They're just so gorgeous in this scene specifically, as well as the music in a lot of these scenes. This upcoming scene though was a scene that a lot of people complained about because the scene is not adapting one-to-one with the manga. Now, while the animation itself is really good still, this is going to be the most controversial thing I'm going to say here. If you want something that's exactly like the manga, just go read the manga. This is not a manga, and this is led by one of the most ambitious directors in the anime industry. You are never going to get something just one-to-one. It's the same thing with how Chainsaw Man Season 1 was, also being led by a really ambitious director. You're not going to get one-to-one there. It still got the message across. I still understood what it was going for here. The drawings are immaculate, and the effects animations are also incredible. And I think they even animate the 2D background in this scene where Ogi's freaking out about seeing Maki here. Really great stuff. Zenin Clan fight is incredible. One of the best displays of action animation in the series, starting out with Itsuki Tsuchigami's animation, which is one of the best sequences on the show, giving us a lot of really dynamic action animation from many different shot compositions, having Maki showcase a lot of these really animalistic movements but still have a lot of grace to her at some points. This scene also does what I think the Yuta fight struggled with, which is having a lot of really fast cuts, but these actually lead really well into each other. I actually feel these things are holding on to scenes long enough to give us an understanding while actually carrying energy from one shot to another, which is a problem I had with a lot of scenes in the very first episode directed by Goso. This is also, like a lot of people pointed out, a really fat Kill Bill reference. Much like the Kill Bill fight it's referencing, it also just completely goes black and white. This is mostly animated by, I'm just gonna say, Bon. And when it hits this black and white scene, we actually see a lot less detail when it comes to the character designs, but I feel like the line work gets more pronounced. It's more apparent, but also a lot more loose. It feels like it's going to a more traditional look when it comes to the art style, giving a really old Japanese anime movie feel. I like specifically how the cameraman follows Maki's body here. It looks very similar to something you'd see in something like Samurai Champloo, for example, with the creativity not stopping, having Maki surf on the blood that she's causing, sliding to 1-inch punch somebody, just some crazy work. In this, we're also getting consistent shots of showing us the depth of the space, which is something Gege couldn't really do in the manga, but you really get a good feel of how much carnage that Maki is causing once we get these more zoomed out shots of these scenes. And funny enough, Maki killing the last person literally turns the color back on. I really like this part of the fight. Not only is the animation just incredible, but you could also argue that there's a lot of narrative significance in this traditional kind of animation, or the traditional feel to it, as this is a unit of people that have no curse techniques, so they specialize in swordplay. One could come with the interpretation that she's engaging them in this tradition as she's ending it, or something like that. Some people could probably come up with better interpretations, but it's really good to think about. After this really awkward zoom in, we get some incredible effects animated by Hayato Kurosaki. It's very obvious who these are done by. You can sleep on these effects, I'm not gonna lie, but this is where we get into the part of the fight that becomes really mind-blowing, really ambitious, really attention demanding, and one of the biggest love letters to animator Yutaka Nakamura I've seen in my life. Pretty much everything from here on out is very Utapon inspired, which is incredible because this part being more spectacle based gives it an entirely different feeling from the part where she's fighting the Kukuru unit. Fights are still stories in themselves, and you don't want every part of the fight to feel similar to one another. So having the scale bump up when you meet stronger people is a natural progression to this fight. This part is all animated by Muk Muk, and the drawings here are incredible, but when they break away, very Utapon coded. Both of these are literally not moving on the screen, but there's an illusion of movement in the background as these lines shift across the screen. You understand, because of how gravity works, that both of these characters are falling actually. This man goes upward to strike Maki, holds this pose, and then the smears showcase that he's accelerating into this attack. Choreography goes quick. The music is telling you how fast this thing is gonna go. Couple swings, sword's broken, neck is out, he's gone. Chojuro tries to attack. There's a really nice zoom in and turn around. I think we actually see things from his perspective this time, because we see Maki's hand zoom in once again. Same thing happened, his throat throat is gone, blood splurts out. I think that's from the viewer's perspective. Ronta's ability causes the circle to appear under Maki, very Yutapon coded. We see this oftentimes with Yutapon inspired animators, and more so than just how fluid these animations are, like the walking from Jinichi, the drawing quality is just incredible as well. More Yutapon. This is a direct callback to Deku punching overhaul here. The multiple fists, the timing, the blackened background, it doesn't get crazier than this. The Naoya versus Maki fight is once again the most Yutapon thing to ever Nakamura. What else is there to say? The smear work, the color changes when Maki gets punched through the wall, the cubic debris with the explosive timing, even the hair movements that is also done similar to how Yutapon does them. The multiple Naoyas punching Maki seems like a combination between his Concrete Revolution sequence and his Deku sequence in the movie 3. The level of scale is immaculate. There's so much background animation as well. Genuinely one of the best sequences I've ever seen in JJK. Hone animating something similar to My Hero Movie 5 sequence with the super speed zigzag across the screen hitting the person. We get an indication of how much depth there is, how far Maki is away. With Naoya being up close to the camera, a full 2D animated background that's moving as Maki's flying through mountains in the background, showing how fast she's getting swung all over the place. Another really Yutapon-esque scene, zooming into Maki as we have another black background, the sharp smears as Naoya hits her, with a clear Yosuke Hajime drawing as well. This is the episode people were saying was underwhelming in quality, by the way. This next scene, I think, is very obviously Hakugo, or at least has some of his input. These sharp lines and long limbs that Maki has, as well as these effect shapes, look very similar to Hakugo's own key animation. I've seen it enough to notice. As well as this drawing with Maki and just only her eyes being blacked out is very similar to stuff he did on something like Fate Apocrypha. Maki trying to give Naoya a hug once again changes the aspect ratio. Once again, like to think of it as like a duel, an open challenge, and I think the music is going along with it, setting up the anticipation between an unstoppable force and an unmovable object. Maki standing firm as this unstoppable force destroys the environment, causes heavy damage to the terrain as he picks up more and more speed, with more Yutapon-esque effects before he lightly touches Maki's shoulder. There's some incredible drawings when Naoya is about to charge in, but I don't really like this part where Maki's about to punch Naoya. I think it looks like it melts too much. The drawings, in my personal opinion, are a little bit awkward. The episode ends with a little bit more subtle character, I think, with really good art direction, with the final scene of her walking away from the massacre being a play on how she walked into it. Overall, I really like this episode. It's not perfect, obviously, I have my criticisms, but people pretending like it wasn't good or wasn't as good as it was hyped up to be, I feel like are just lying. Like, the only episode you can argue with as a whole that reaches this level is season 2 episode 16. In any case, this was a fantastic display of animation, and it is like top 3 episode of JJK in terms of animation in my opinion. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and me yapping about the animation for a little bit and who's behind it. Have a fantastic day.